everyone. So today we're going to cover everything, still have the Trusty Children's Bible. We're going to cover everything between the entry to Jerusalem up to and including the Last Supper. So, to start, the withered fig tree. Jesus was hungry. He looked around for food and saw a fig tree standing by the road. Its branches were strong. Its leaves hung dense and green over the earth. It looked as if it would have plenty of fruit, just as Jerusalem looked as if it would be full of the people who loved God. The midday heat rose from the stone path. Jesus walked through it to the tree. He drew the branches apart and raised his hand to pluck the fruit. But the branches were empty. The tree was a sham. It held no fruit, just as the priests and scholars of Jerusalem held no love for the Son of Man. "Nothing will ever grow on you," said Jesus, and at once the fig tree withered away. Jesus stopped on the Mount of Olives and looked down onto the city, saying sadly, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you murder the prophets and stone the messengers sent to you. How often I have wanted to gather your children as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you would not let me." Then he turned to his disciples. "The time will come," he said, "when men will forget God and their love will grow cold. Then they will hate you because of me." Jesus drives the money changers out of the temple. Jesus went into the temple. To the right and left of him squatted beggars, stretching out their hands to him. Jesus spoke to them and gave them his blessing. In the forecourt sat the blind and the lame. They were not allowed to come any further. Jesus healed them and passed on. He came to another courtyard. Here the smell and noise resembled a cattle market before the Passover. Rams were strutting at their chains. Kids and lambs butted and trembled in their pens, while doves and pigeons beat their wings against their cages, trying to fly out and escape. Most people did not bring their own animals to sacrifice, so all these creatures were waiting to be bought and killed as offerings to God. Above the noise of the frightened beasts could be heard the shouting and swearing of the men who owned them. From time to time, an animal would break loose and its owner would chase it through the crowd, roughly pushing aside the people who had come there to pray. He, in turn, would be laughed at by the money changers who sat in long rows at their tables, with piles of coins stacked in front of them. Jesus stood still. He must have remembered the words of the prophet Malachi. "Suddenly the Lord will come to the temple, and he will cleanse the temple." He made a rough whip out of some cord that was lying on the ground. Then he raised his arm and brought the whip down on the pile of coins so that they rolled across the yard. He scattered the cages so that they burst open and the birds flew away. He raised his whip in the direction of the traders, and they left their goods and ran out of the temple. He kicked down the pens so that the lambs and kids scattered into the streets. Finally, he overturned the tables themselves and scattered their benches in disorder. "Take this all away," he cried. The priests and the temple guards came rushing to see what had happened. When he saw them, Jesus cried in a voice of terrible anger, "It is written in the Scriptures, 'My house shall be a house of prayer for all people,' but you have made it into a den of thieves." Jesus answers the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Pharisees already disliked Jesus. Now they were joined by the Sadducees, a religious group who worshipped slightly differently from the Pharisees and did not believe in a resurrection, the bringing back of life of everyone who had died believing in God. Together they tried to set a trap for Jesus. When they saw him coming to the temple to teach, they brought him a woman who had been unfaithful to her husband. "The laws Moses gave us say that this woman should be stoned to death," they said. "What do you say to that?" As if he had not heard them, Jesus bent down and began to write in the dust. They repeated their question. He stood up and looked at them. "Let the man among you who has never done anything wrong throw the first stone at her." Then he stooped down again and went on writing on the ground. The men were silent. Not one among them could say he had never sinned. So they went away one by one. Then Jesus said quietly to the woman, "Go home now, and do not sin again." The widow's gift. Soon after that, the high council in Jerusalem published a decree. A herald proclaimed, "Jesus of Nazareth is leading the people astray. He is making them ignore the laws of Moses. Anyone who knows where he is must inform the high council so that he can be arrested and tried." Wherever Jesus went, he was followed by a crowd of people. They formed a protective wall around him so that the temple guards dared not arrest him. One day it happened that he was teaching in the women's court in the temple. He talked about giving. To love and to give, he said, was more important than anything else. A widow came in. She was old and bent and obviously very poor. Nobody seemed to see her except Jesus. Another woman came in. She was young and rich, and everyone noticed her. The gold bracelets on her arms and ankles tinkled. She threw a handful of money into the temple offering box, and the sound of the large coins dropping echoed from wall to wall. The widow held one coin hidden in her hand. It was small, and it was all that she had. Quietly, she dropped it into the box. Jesus said, "The rich give a little of what they have. They give what they don't need. This widow has given God her last coin. She trusts him and gives him everything. Her love is richer than all the money in the world, and God will reward her with great blessings and joy." Jesus describes the day of judgment. Jesus said, "At the end of time, the Son of Man will return. The sun will go dark, and the moon will cease to give light. The stars will disappear, and the air and the sky will shake. Then the Son of Man will appear riding on the clouds in great splendor. He will gather everyone from every corner of the earth together and separate them from one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Those who have led good lives will be on his right, those who have been wicked on his left. He will say to those on his right, 'Come, O blessed people, it is time for you to inherit the kingdom prepared for you. When I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was sick, you visited me. When I was in prison, you came to me.' Then the good people will say, 'Lord, when did we do all these things?' And he will reply, 'When you did them to the least important person you can think of, you were doing them for me.' Then he will say to those on his left, 'Because you did not do these things freely to anyone, you did not do them to me. Leave me, you are cursed forever.'" Judas plots against Jesus. The chief priests and elders were holding another meeting. They were in the palace of the high priest Caiaphas. Yet again, the subject was how to get rid of Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus, meanwhile, was speaking to his disciples on a hill outside the city. He said, "I have not come to judge the world, but to save it. I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you will never walk in darkness, but will live all your lives in the light. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." One of the 12 men, Judas Iscariot, left Jesus suddenly. He ran all the way back to Jerusalem to the palace of the high priest. "Let me in," he cried, knocking on the heavy door. "I have something important to say." He was brought before Caiaphas and his council. "What do you want, Judas Iscariot?" "I want to destroy Jesus," Judas replied. "Once I believed in his teaching. Now I do not. I cannot stand his love. I will take you to him." "We usually pay our spies," said Caiaphas. "How much do you want?" Judas shrugged his shoulders. "Pay what you like," he said. Caiaphas hated Jesus. "The usual price for a slave is 30 pieces of silver," he said. "Will you take that?" "Yes," he said, "I will." The Last Supper. Jesus took Peter and John aside and said to them, "It is time to prepare the Passover supper. Go into Jerusalem to the well of Siloam. You will meet a man there carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him, and when you reach the house he enters, say to the master of the house, 'Our master says, my time has come. I will celebrate the feast of the Passover in your house.'" Peter and John did as Jesus said. They were led to an upper room with a low table in it, set round with 3 benches, just enough room for 13 people. They laid out the food prescribed for the feast: bitter herbs and nuts, raisins and figs, vinegar, salt, and a jar of wine. The oil lamps were trimmed, the unleavened bread was baking in the oven. Only the lamb was missing. When all was ready, Jesus came. He brought the other apostles with him, and they climbed up the stone staircase to the upper room. Below them lay the city, its people filled with happiness as they celebrated their release from slavery in Egypt. It was their night of salvation and freedom. Jesus went to the head of the table. He gave the blessing and passed around the bitter herbs dipped in vinegar. Suddenly he stood up, took off his long robe, and tied a towel around himself like a servant. He took a basin and a jar of water and began to wash the feet of his disciples. Peter exclaimed, "Lord, you mustn't wash my feet." Jesus kneeled in front of him. "Unless you let me wash you," he replied, "you cannot share what is going to happen to me. I am making myself humble before you, and you must make yourselves humble before others. Servants and masters are equal in the eyes of God." When he had washed their feet and dried them, he took the flat, unleavened bread in his hands. "Praise be to you, O God, who have made the bread come from this earth," he said. But instead of adding the usual words the Jews spoke at the blessing, "This is the bread of misery which our fathers ate," he held it up and said, "This is my body, which I am giving up for you." Then he broke it and shared the pieces among them. He poured the red wine. He poured the red wine into the big cup and thanked God with the words, "Praise be to God, who feeds the world with his mercy, goodness, grace, and mercy." Then he added, "This is my blood, the blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for men." They each drank in turn from the cup that he handed them. He was giving his life for the people. He was pouring it out for them so that they could live new lives. Nothing now would separate them from the love of God. Jesus had given them the New Testament. Jesus predicts his betrayal. Jesus looked at the 12 men he had chosen to share his last supper on earth. "Indeed, indeed, I tell you, tonight one of you will betray me." They were filled with horror. "Not I, Lord," each one of them said. John, who was sitting on his right, said, "Lord, which one of us is it? Please tell us." Jesus replied, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread that I have dipped in the dish." He gave Judas Iscariot the bread, and Judas exclaimed, "Surely you don't think I would betray you, Lord?" Jesus replied, "It is you who have said it." The supper drew to its end. "I give you a new commandment," said Jesus. "Love one another as I have loved you. There is no greater love than this, that a man should lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends. When I have left you, I will send the Holy Spirit to take care of you. He will help you and guide you in everything that is true. Be prepared for people to hate you, but after darkness will come light, after sorrow, joy, and after grief, gladness. I am part of you, and God is part of me. Now I pray to my Father that he will make us all one together."